so let's go ahead and get started. I think we're going to be one shy of a quorum, so we're going to postpone voting on the minutes until the Q4 meeting, which is fine. I think that was the only big thing we were going to vote on. We have a good agenda, though. As you'll see, we've got some Jeremy Harrell from ClearPath's going to join us again. There he is. He's on the WebEx, which is great. He's going to provide some updates on a lot of really exciting activity at the federal level. We're going to go a little bit over the Virginia Energy Plan. We'll share just a little bit as that's going to be rolling out soon. April will provide us an update on some of VNEX efforts. We've got a couple other items to go over as well. So thanks everybody for joining us. I will kick it off with a quick safety message. This was one actually reminding me, I know I usually, because I'm fresh off driving down here, I end up doing one on commuting. But it is true that with the changing of the seasons and the fact that we haven't, daylight savings time doesn't switch until November. I don't know if you all are noticing, but in the morning and in the evening, both dark and I seem to be driving home these days with the sun directly in my eyes almost. So just as we're getting into fall and then into winter and as things change, just be kind of at heightened awareness as you're commuting. There's a lot more activity out on the roads. They're just talking about the traffic is definitely picking up to kind of the pre-COVID levels. So just a reminder for everyone to just be aware as you're commuting and driving around these days. But as you said, I do want to jump into Jeremy here real quick, but there is a lot going on, both in the clean energy and nuclear energy space here in the Commonwealth at the federal level. So I think both this meeting and as we wrap up the year with our fourth quarter and look at some of the annual report stuff, there's a lot of really interesting and exciting things to discuss. So before we get to Jeremy, why don't we, since we've got him on, why don't we just go around the room? We've got a couple of new faces here and just introduce everybody and then we'll get started. So Michael, do you want to kick us off?
Okay. Michael Lemke, I run the Nuclear Environment Group for HII.
Rich Denhams, Director of Energy and Engineering Research at Liberty University.
Jeff Fox, Director of Research Development at the School of Engineering at University of Virginia.
Hello everybody, Arlen Wolstead from the State Corporation Commission, General Counsel's Office.
David Essa, also from the SCC, Director of the Division of Public Utility Regulation.
Tom Ponte with Framingham.
Gary Tepler, Interim Dean of Engineering.
April Wade, the Executive Director for the Energy Consortium.
Gene Graycheck, representing the American Nuclear Society.
Larry Torkey, Energy and Regulatory Manager at the Virginia Department of Energy.
I'm John Capps, representing Virginia's community colleges.
Hi everybody, my name is Braden Croy. I'm with the Dominion Energy Innovation Center.
And Pearson, Two Gaps Consulting, we represent the Nuclear Energy Consortium.
And Brandy, do you want to?
Brandy Fraser-Beskovich, Virginia Energy, Virginia Department of Energy, Data Analytics.
Ryan Walsh, Virginia Department of Energy, Energy Technology Analyst.
And Ryan Welch, just so the board knows, will be taking over as lead for VIRGINA in the coming year. I'm going to still act as a supporting role, and I will still plan to attend regularly in that supporting role, but he's going to take the lead to help kind of take some of the load off.
All right, thanks. So we are fortunate again to be joined by Jeremy Harrell, who is the Chief Strategy Officer in Energy Space. And I thought it'd be great for him to kind of give us an update of what all is happening and maybe answer any questions that folks may have about the Inflation Reduction Act or other policies. So Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you. We can see your slides and hopefully you can see us too.
Awesome. Yeah, I can see you all as well. Thanks, Tom, for the very kind introduction. And it's really great to see you all. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but hopefully I'll make one of these live in the flesh at some point in the next couple of years. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this stuff with you all, and as Tom mentioned, it's been a lot of exciting development that's been happening in Washington, D.C. in this space, particularly in the clean energy space, and with a really, I think, relative to the other clean energy technologies, disproportionate amount of successes and policies that have been put in place aimed at growing U.S. nuclear growth. And I'm going to go through some of those things over the next period of time. One thing I want to after folks interrupt me as you need if there's a question that comes up, something along those lines, I want this to be the most helpful for you. It does not need to be me just presenting slides and such to you all, so please interrupt me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Tom gave kind of an overview of me. Nuclear Pact is just a nonprofit largely based in DC, focused on clean energy and climate policy. Nuclear is a central tenet of what we work on, but not everything that we work on. And then you mentioned my role at U.S. Nuclear Industry Council, which is one of the leading national trade associations focused on the growth of nuclear and the American supply chain. What is easiest to do? Do I just say next slide, or is there a way for me to toggle here? Or?
I think Brandy's got it, so yeah, just say next slide. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Brandy. Really appreciate it. No problem. So really, on this point, the last 2.5 years have been particularly great. There have been 4 very significant climate bills that at every time that they were enacted was the biggest action Congress has taken in over a decade on clean energy and climate. So we need to date back prior at the end of the Trump administration and the end of the previous Congress. A big refresh of clean energy policy got enacted into law, known as the Energy Act of 2020, which effectively was a reorientation of federal programs focused on energy innovation and technology, and this was significant. It was the largest emissions reduction policy since the Energy Act of 2007, or the 2005, or the 2007 tax deal that got done at the Bush administration. And we at that time thought it was going to radically transform the policy landscape, and ironically has changed. Relevant to nuclear, this is the first bill that really codified and launched the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, a key federal public-private partnership program that I think I discussed with you all last time I was here, and really like modernize the DOE's focus on clean energy and climate moving forward. As we moved into the Biden administration being sworn in and a very narrow Congress at the beginning of this Congress last year, one of the biggest policy that was accomplished last year was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this bill funded those promises that the Energy Act made ultimately. So over $62 billion was given to the Department of Energy to accelerate these key moonshot programs like ARDP and other key research programs that have now been modernized and focused on the energy and climate challenges our nation faces. Really unprecedented. This was multiple years of funding in this space. So in the case of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, the Office of Nuclear Energy got over $2.5 billion. So basically what was needed to demonstrate the X-energy in the TerraPower reactor for the first 5 years of funding for it, which is pretty crazy. You know, in DC, I've been in DC almost 18 years now. Everyone wants forward appropriations, right? Everyone would love to have the certainty of knowing that their resources are available in the next 3 or 4 years, 2 years. And we used to laugh at folks when they would state that as their priority. And the infrastructure bill ironically did do that. It was kind of a once in a long time. I don't want to say once in a generation, because as I mentioned, all these things seem to continue to move the Overton window for us, but that injection of resources in the department is significant. And then we've had an influx of activity over the last couple months. So there was a big focus on what was often called the China Competitiveness Bill, the American Peace Bill. Ultimately, it was called the CHIPS Plus Bill, which invests in U.S. semiconductor R&D and a variety of other clean energy things. The reason I bring this up is there was a concerted program in there to focus on coal to nuclear switch and a lot of financial support for licensing in that space and potential government public-private partnerships to specifically build new nuclear at brownfield sites, so suitable sites like a former coal plant or a former gas plant or a formal industrial facility. And I think we've seen in a lot of states, and particularly our neighbors to the west, West Virginia, is looking at this a lot, right? West Virginia just recently eliminated their nuclear ban and is putting money behind kind of switch on that front. And then the bill that got the most attention overall was the big Democratic reconciliation bill, known as the Inflation Reduction Act, that was signed into law just a couple weeks ago, and effectively put into place $3 billion of federal tax incentives in the next decade. And it did a handful of other really important things for nuclear as well, including some policies in place to prevent closure of existing reactors, put a significant down payment in programs to give us our next generation of nuclear fuels, and put into place a variety of programs that potentially could be partnerships for industrial users and nuclear for the use of process heat. So, my big point here is the landscape has changed rapidly over the last 2.5 years from a federal policy standpoint. And Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has made a strong statement in each of these things that nuclear is a significant part of the U.S.'s future energy policy, or our energy future as a whole. And that's kind of been reiterated across these new bills. Next slide, please. And this was on top of what we thought at the time was a lot of momentum as well. So in 2017, 2019, there were some signature bills on reforming permitting at the NRC. A less robust tax credit was provided in a big tax bill there in 2018, and then enhancing the DOE. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it really just kind of underscores the point that like Congress every year is looking for new things that can do to bolster domestic nuclear and grow the future of nuclear in this country. Next slide, please. So what do those big four bills that I showed in that second slide really mean? We've basically done the gamut of federal policy here. What's considered authorizing policy, so key program direction to the Department of Energy and to the NRC and things like that have been enacted in all these clean energy technologies. As I mentioned, significant money has been given to the department for cost shares and government partnerships in this space, and now there's tax incentives as well. So as ClearPath looks at technology commercialization and technology innovation, we see like significant, three big pieces of puzzle across the finish line. There's government certainty and law, there's multi-year funding to ensure these projects are successful, and then there's a market signal, essentially an incentive in place to help make initial projects, first of a kind to end of a kind projects that often are more expensive than their later commercial costs, and frankly making these things, I think, pencil out for a lot of utilities. I know in our conversations with investors and utilities in the country, it's made a lot of folks rethink their 10-year plans, and in particular in the case of CCUS and nuclear, I think a lot more thought being put into how they factor those technologies into their IRPs. Next slide. So what does that mean granularly for nuclear? Here is kind of the mix of items. The Energy Act had these big pushes and directions to DOE. I mentioned the RDP funding. There was also a $6 billion program for existing nuclear in the infrastructure bill. The CHIPS bill, I mentioned the Vision for the Future, focused on fossil closure communities. There was also investments in nuclear university research infrastructure as well, and a big push on fusion. And then, as you can see in this last bucket, the tax bill I'm mentioning, the bill that just was enacted into law over the last couple weeks. It was more money for nuclear fuels. It was a tax incentive for new nuclear moving forward, a tax incentive to preserve existing nuclear in this country, a new tax credit for the production of hydrogen, which is particularly interesting for nuclear, and then a lot of other government financing programs like enhancements to the loan guarantee program that can lower the cost of capital, and additional cost share partnerships that can come to fruition. Next slide. And actually, before I transition over there, I should stop here and see if there's any questions. Because I know I just talked about a lot of what's been happening in DC over the last 2.5 years in 3 minutes, or 8 minutes maybe.
Any questions? Okay, I think we're okay, Jeremy, for now. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, given where your all work is focused on, and I thought it was important to maybe do a couple clicks or dig in a little deeper on a few of these things that I think are really key to new nuclear moving forward. So prior to this bill getting enacted into law a couple weeks ago, nuclear had a pretty minor tax incentive in place that did not really compare to wind and solar and other technologies. What this bill does do is create a new clean electricity production credit and investment credit that largely puts clean tech on the same playing field. So the incentive is largely the same for wind, solar, nuclear, and carbon capture with CCUS if they were to utilize this credit. Hydropower as well, for example. And this is really the first time in our history that nuclear has been on this playing field. And this credit is in place for at least the next decade and most likely longer. So the way that they constructed this, it either expires in 10 years or at a certain emission reduction level for national emissions. One that also tell you it's not going to happen in the next 10 years, where the U.S. is not going to meet that emission target. This credit is likely around for the next 15 to 20 years. And so, as people, as utilities, as state governments, as the site decision makers are looking at, should I have confidence that these policies are in place and should be factored in our calculus of what we do as we make decisions on potentially moving forward with nuclear. I think there should be confidence that this is either tax incentive, but for the production, clean electricity from future nuclear that will be for the foreseeable future. And I lay a little bit of the economic dynamics here. It can be as high as a 50% investment tax credit, and can get up to 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour on the production credit side. One of the kind of extra strings that were attached to these tax credits in this most recent bill was a need for domestic content, a boosting for project components that are in energy communities, and also some requirements on labor. Nuclear is super fortunate in that case, that they really meet most of these characterizations just by the nature of the domestic industry. Some industries that will have some problems are solar, for example, that do have domestic content struggles, things along those lines as a result of our reliance on minerals for their construction from overseas, in particular China. And this is on the content of the generation project, not the fuel. The fuel is a little more of a complicated issue, as I know you all know. But I feel good that these incentives are going to be available for nuclear for a long time. Next. Fuel issue is a critical one. A lot of this next generation of advanced reactors need something called high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Over the last couple fiscal years, Congress has allocated almost $800 million to a program to catalyze a domestic industry here. Long-term fuel security and the need to get our nuclear fuel supply not from competitors like Russia. This is going to be really important. The $700 million that was in the recent bill that was appropriated to DOE, I think actually puts the program on a chance for its viability. It makes the annual demands on it not as steep. And so, I think it does put it in a position to be successful. And I know a lot of the nuclear companies in this country and there in state of Virginia are looking at this program as a way to help accelerate commercialization of advanced nuclear fuels in this country. Any questions on the fuel side? Or comments? All right, next slide, please. I mentioned kind of beyond the tax credit side, the Department of Energy loan program got a bunch of different stability and resources in place. This gives you just a little bit of an overview of the interest in nuclear right now, which I think is really, really high. LPO did make its first kind of announcement recently with Holtec, a small modular reactor
on a small modular reactor manufacturing facility. So they announced plans to potentially build 4 projects in the Northeast over the next 10 to 15 years. And LPO is going to help them finance their manufacturing facility in New Jersey. That was kind of the first new nuclear announcement that had been made at LPO. They did help the Georgia reactors and Vogel, but I think it was a really exciting step to show that there's significant market interest in this stuff, and that some of the new advanced reactor developers are looking for these innovative ways to finance their projects. And Jigger Shaw, who came over from the financial sector to run LPO, and is probably one of the most publicly visible members of the Biden Department of Energy, leads this program, and he's talked about this pretty publicly, that there's a lot of folks that are in before him evaluating possible deals. Their tracker shows 77 total applications that are under some level of review in the nuclear space, which is really incredible, because a decade ago that certainly wasn't the case. They're at the point where they're thinking, oh, they needed additional flexibility when Congress acted to allow them to potentially move forward on a wave of new projects over the next couple of years. I think the other thing that is interesting is that they did get some authority to finance kind of repowering or repurposing energy infrastructure as well, which I do think could be helpful, for example, for a cold nuclear switch or something along those lines as well. So I definitely think it's important to watch the loan program office, particularly at DOE, kind of out the cost share stuff that happens at the Office of Nuclear Energy and outside of the kind of tax provisions that are involved. Federal incentives for the nuclear. Next slide, please. I did want to underscore a little bit some of the hydrogen stuff. I think we're going to share these slides with everyone, so I'm not going to walk through all of it, but it's pretty great that Congress has thrown a ton of money behind hydrogen opportunities recently as well. $8 billion for the DOE to allocate to build regional hydrogen hubs. I know there are proposals in this region for kind of a regional hub, and nuclear does have some potential in that to play a significant part in hydrogen production in this country. And there are new tax incentives in place as well to incentivize the production of hydrogen, as folks see immense potential for it in low carbon fuels. And so I did want to flag the hydrogen stuff, since there is a lot of nuclear industry interested in utilizing nuclear to produce low carbon fuels. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of the dynamics of the hydrogen credit as a whole. Again, a scenario where you can get a 30% ITC for a facility to produce hydrogen. You could combine the hydrogen tech credit with the clean electricity credit that I had mentioned earlier in my conversation. You can't with things like 45J and 45Q, but another area where there's a robust tax incentive in place that could be used to advance a nuclear project, depending on what use case for that project is. So what does that mean for the next Congress? I mentioned there was a ton that occurred over frankly the last 4.5 years, but particularly the last 2.5 years. And so the Clear Path works on the clean energy and climate space, and so that might be helpful to give you a little bit of a forecast of what we're expecting Congress will focus on over the next 2 years, and how that might impact the nuclear picture. Next slide, please. One I wanted to write that I think what does make it very clear is with all this policy coming forward, it is now in the hands of industry to move forward and start building stuff. And so I'm going to show a couple of things here that I think show the robust private sector advancement that's happening in the industry. And I think that's what we're going to be focused on a lot over the next few years. It's going to be significant milestones hit by companies who are both developing new reactors and developing fuel facilities as well. One of the central kind of government programs that are coming into place is, I mentioned, the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. It's a cost share program with the Department of Energy. Ultimately, the two winners of that competition who are building their commercial scale projects with Mccarthy are TerraPower, and their first project's going to be in Wyoming, and their X Energy and their high temperature gas reactor in Washington State. All progressing well in the process. Site selection, getting together for the advancement, starting construction, starting to move forward in the NRC process. So there are two companies in particular, two of many, but two companies who have DOE backing to commercially demonstrate in the next, by the end of this decade, targeting kind of roughly that 2027 period. But fortunately, it's not just those two. It's not just two companies that had to win big top share agreements. So the next slide, I'll show a little more there. This just gives you a little bit more overview of those two particular projects. We can skip ahead to the next slide. This is just our very basic estimates of the nuclear footprint kind of across the country at the moment. Projects that have been announced, companies that have significant presence in places across the country. This is really with a focus, mostly of a focus on the reactor side, but just to show you like all the things that are popping up, including in the research reactor space. Next slide, please. And this future is now. Here are a list of commercial reactor projects that are advancing forward, all targeting kind of over the course of the next 10 years, all within that time frame of where some of these policies are in place. And as you can see, it's not just TerraPower and X Energy, it's folks like GE Hitachi, it's Fulltech, it's Oklo, which is a micro reactor design, NuScale, building the project in Idaho to provide power in Utah. All these folks are underway and moving forward on the project with the project delivery timeline is kind of within the next 5 to 8 years. Next slide. And it's also happening on the research reactor side as well, and that's significant, both from supply chain benefits, human personnel and training, things along those lines. And so a couple exciting public and private partnerships, and partnerships with DOE to move new reactor types forward in this time frame as well. Next slide. What does that mean for Congress here? As I said, I think now is the time for industry to start moving forward. We're going to see an influx of private sector milestones hit over the next couple of years. But Congress will still be working on nuclear policy for sure. I think one thing has become very clear: there's strong bipartisan support in the Congress, regardless of the political makeup of government, to support nuclear. I think just as purely a clear path perspective, and I think it's also the general current consensus, at least with current polling and things along those lines, that it's likely the Republicans will take the majority in the House. I think a lot more in question in the Senate. I think I bring this up because clean energy is going to still be a big part of the Republican House majority's plan. This thing I'm showing on the right, which is Kevin McCarthy's Energy Climate Conservation Task Force, are kind of pillars that they see as kind of the key tenets of things that they're going to be focusing on should they take the majority. I mention it largely because the things like Let America Build, beating China and competing on the international frame, and energy innovation all fit the nuclear bucket. And when they rolled out these pillars and such, frankly, there was a signature nuclear talking point or piece in every single one of those buckets. And so I think it's a signal to show if Republicans do take the majority in the House, nuclear is going to be kind of in the forefront of their policy agenda as well. Where we've seen, regardless of what happens in the Senate, there's strong bipartisan support for nuclear there as well. Next slide, please. With all this money, federal money that's getting thrown at clean energy, what are kind of some of the next challenges that are moving forward? We see the landscape as the regulatory, supply chain, permitting things are going to be a huge blocker. And I show this chart largely to show, it reflects what it would take to actually build new generation in this country that reflects the modeling that Reagan administration and many are saying these new policies like the tax incentives are going to bring about. We have to radically change how we build things in this country and break through kind of permitting issues and things along those lines to have any shot of this exponential growth. And I showed this to show like just the practical feasibility of doing this. Like, I mean, the status quo is not feasible, which is why I think we're going to see a lot of focus from Congress on permitting as a whole. There's been a lot of political back and forth in Washington about this over recent days. Senator Manchin has a proposal that he thought he had an agreement on, and he had to yank it. I think this is going to be a conversation that continues well into the next couple of years, especially as companies try to utilize some of these financial incentives the federal government has put in place and hit some walls with some federal permitting. Next slide. There are other bills out there that are focused on the international picture as well. This is a legislation introduced by Joe Manchin, who I think everyone knows, and Jim Risch, who's the top Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Is about to get a House companion as well here in the next week or so before folks leave town. Really focused on the global market too. I think something that we've seen that is really particularly relevant to nuclear is given the energy scarcity issues in Europe and the reliance on Russian gas. Obviously, the U.S. has mobilized quickly to help try to provide U.S. gas supplies for that. But I've been hearing from vendors, particularly the members of U.S. NIC, that some of these key developers that I mentioned earlier, that the interest from the Europeans in particular, and really goes across the globe, as they see like this concerning issue where there's a geopolitical dynamic that radically turns energy reserves and they want to take things in their own hands. So I think you're going to see more efforts from Congress to try to push U.S. technology abroad. I think that's particularly important for folks who are examining the possibility of building new nuclear. It means more customers, right? And if there's a larger order book, then that's beneficial to U.S. supply chains, particularly their U.S. reactor developers. And you're sharing a little bit of the learnings of building these new projects abroad. I think to get the real cost declines of deploying these technologies and driving them down, learning by doing. Having global international partners that are going to do this as well, I think helps accelerate that. Next slide, please. And then there's a big focus on the NRC moving forward. So I think the NRC is working to modernize and try to be ready for this influx of new designs that are coming before it. The NRC itself admits it expects at least 10 new reactor applications by 2026. They're not prepared to take those on at this point, and it's why Chairman Hansen has taken a really forward-looking step in wanting to make more hires at the NRC, prepare for that future. They need to do more, and I think Congress is going to try to force them to do more. I think the key tenets of new policies in this space will be do no harm. We don't want to delay new reactor designs going through the process. But we do want to make the regulatory process more nimble, make it easier to scale new technologies abroad, and I think we have a 5-person commission. At least 4 commissioners who are committed to seeing that come to fruition. Next slide. And so yeah, I think that was what I wanted to touch on. I'm happy to go back to any of these that have a little more of the details of the recent statutes. I'm happy to talk political forecasting a little bit too. That's helpful, whatever is the best use of your all time is helpful. Given the jobs you guys have there, I really appreciate everyone's time. And Tom, thank you, and Brandy, thank you for the opportunity to present to you all.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great, really helpful. I know I have a couple questions.
Your chart, what is your thought about, I mean, obviously there needs to be a change of mood within the Congress to fund that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think a benefit of the past 2.5 years, I mentioned the $2.5 billion that went into R&D. That takes a major annual spending pressure off any program.
Sorry,
no worries.
Go ahead.
It's also on the fuel side as well. The $700 million that was given on Cameron, I think that's going to hopefully be almost $1 billion program moving forward. But that influx of resources does make that over the next 5 years a 200 million act rather than a 400, 500 million act. The reason I bring that up is to April's question earlier, what are going to be some challenges in the new Congress? Any budget's not going to go up 2x every fiscal year end, there's less competition from these big infrastructure projects. I do think it's incumbent on the DOE to rethink this project a little bit and how they're going to move forward. The design is very similar to the TerraPower design that's getting built in Wyoming. They need to take some of those learnings from that to, I think, both lower costs and factor in kind of project planning and things along those lines. So I think the BTR is still a really important national asset that we do need over to really see if the players scale up in the long term and do fuels testing and materials testing. I do think we have a longer burn on that now than was originally anticipated 2 or 3 years ago. And it's getting come to fruition. But I'm still optimistic about it if DOE does respond to some of the congressional criticisms on its initial project design.
Anything else? All right, well, Jeremy, thank you for spending the time with us. This was really, really helpful. We always appreciate your insight, and I'm sure we'll have you back again as we continue to just pile up all the positive legislation.
Awesome. Good. Yeah, hopefully I can see you all in person sometime. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Please don't hesitate to reach out and shoot me an email. If I don't know the answer, I'll get you in touch with someone who does. I want to be the resource for you all. You guys are doing extremely important work, and I really appreciate the invitation and the partnership.
Well, thank you.
Thanks all.
Brandy and I talked about yesterday is at our Q4 meeting. We'll have, hopefully we can do a little bit of a deeper dive on the plan itself. Once the details and stuff are out there, we can answer questions and all that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever policy recommendations
Yeah.
we can provide a presentation focusing on each of their aspects.
So everybody stay tuned for Monday's release. April? Do you want to?
So what I can tell you on our work, we have spoken to the governor's administration, had some good conversations, and we have supplied some of that. So hopefully on Monday we'll all be pleasantly surprised what's in there. So I'm looking forward to Monday. On the hub, we were close to, I thought, wrapping everything up on the proposal, but industry has come back to the universities and provided some more feedback. So right now we are revising the proposal for with the feedback that we received. So hopefully we'll have that back. I talked to the writer on the way down here, have that back next week, and so give that to the working group again. But that you will see more action regarding hub development later this fall. So that's what's going on there. And then on the working group for HB 894, we had a meeting on July 11th with the group. I think right now the working group is around 30 people. We've gotten kind of popular. Several people have wanted to get involved. We have a document out of that meeting that is right now is out for comment for the working group members, and we'll be meeting again here this fall to discuss the priorities. But basically they focus it down to 4 buckets: economic development, deployment, workforce, supply chain. Nothing any of you all should be surprised about. But we had some really good conversation. Dr. Katie Huff is Assistant Secretary at Department of Energy in charge of nuclear energy. She spoke to the group. I think we had a really good conversation, and I'm pretty excited on some things that will be happening going forward. Did I miss something?
No, I don't think so. I think everyone or most everybody here has representatives on the working group that are providing input. So if you have specific questions on the draft and the notes that come out, I would encourage you to touch base with your folks on that. I think that was it was a really good kickoff meeting. We had some great dialogue when we were there all day.
Oh, actually, until after 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
We started at 9, and then before it was a good conversation. conversation.
It's a good conversation. So I think that's moving ahead very well. The one thing I would say about the energy plan, again, not knowing what's in it, but I will say the contrast between the last round when we did this and this time is the outreach from
It's 2 times.
last 2 times. From Virginia Energy and the governor's office just for information and input on, nuclear energy has been 100% improved. There's been a lot more dialogue, I know, with April this time around, which is great. I think that's an indication of kind of the changing priorities. So not knowing what's going to be in it, but I think it's safe to assume that nuclear is going to have a key place in there. It's going to be talked about as opposed to last time where it wasn't even mentioned. And that's a good thing. I would suggest that we do April's. Do you want to talk about? Are you planning to do kind of a press release, or I know VNEC was talking about doing some.
Yeah, in the past, what we've always done is after the energy plan has been put out, we've provided a letter between VNEC and the chairman. Usually has always signed on to the letter as well, just commenting on the energy plan. In the past, it's been comments that what we thought should be included. This year we may be doing the same thing, but hopefully we may also be saying some positive things as well. And then we will likely put out some sort of release or something commenting as well.
So I think we'll do that again, and yeah, we kind of have to wait to see what all is announced and what's in it on Monday. But I know VNEC will take the lead on that. And then, like we said, we'll have a briefing at the before meeting. Other questions on those updates or any of those areas? Okay. We're going to hold off on the approval of the minutes since we don't have a quorum, but they are included here in your packet. So just take a look at those. We will entertain if there's any corrections or changes that need to be made. We can entertain those at the next meeting and then approve. Brandy has also gone ahead. The next, our next big task will be the annual report. So you have a copy here. Brandy has gone and updated some of the things. You'll see there's a little update to the look of it. What I would ask is, have we sent out this draft electronically yet?
No.
Okay. So after the meeting, there's some areas that Brandy's already highlighted here that need to be updated. Specifically, what I would call everybody's attention to is the portion that's essentially updates on activities from the past year. There's highlighted areas. So everybody take a look at the sections there. These are updates from last year. And please send Brandy updates about your specific organizations so we can get that portion updated. And then I would also ask if we can send this out electronically. It may be good for just everybody to take a look at this before the next meeting, and we can get kind of a pre-final draft that we can then review and approve at the Q4 meeting. That works
The
for
deadline for the annual report, as you all remember, is November 15th.
Right.
So obviously we should probably try and schedule something prior to that.
Right. That was going to be my suggestion, is that we send out a doodle poll and look for some time, I would say in early November, so that we can review and approve the annual report before the deadline, and that'll kind of wrap up our meetings for the year. So I think what makes sense is we'll send out kind of a poll for the first 2 weeks of November. Everybody can kind of weigh in, but we will need to have a quorum, so to vote on all these things. So we'll want to make sure we have some buffer there in case we have some folks that have conflicts at the last minute. And then you also have the asset inventory. Again, I think we're doing a pretty good job of keeping this up to date, but if you see things that need to be changed, please get those to Brandy. And then in terms of news and member updates, we've kind of gone over the major stuff with Jeremy's briefing, but I will say if you haven't been, had time to go through the Inflation Reduction Act or look at the key nuclear provisions, there's it's a very significant piece of legislation, let me just put it that way, for new nuclear especially. There's a couple of things that Jeremy didn't really touch on because there's frankly a lot in there, but I think are important. The tax credits can actually be realized by tax-exempt entities now. So think of that as public utilities or municipal utilities that in the past could not, because they're tax exempt, right? They couldn't take advantage. Well, they can now qualify for direct payments. So things like the investment tax credit, production tax credit could actually just be turned into grants for those projects. I know that's not as big of a deal here in Virginia because we've got mostly investor-owned utilities, but in other states and where the development is, there's a set of incentives for clean energy manufacturing. It doesn't specifically talk about nuclear, but there's some discussion about how that may apply to expansion or new infrastructure, which I think is significant for Virginia as well, as we already have a lot of infrastructure here, but I think expansion of that as new nuclear goes ahead is going to be important. So anyway, there's going to be more processes that come with the implementation of that law, especially with the Treasury Department and how they issue their guidance and how the tax credits will actually be governed and implemented. That'll be important. But I think as Jeremy talked about, and we kind of discussed in the Q&A, this is going to be potentially significant in bringing in new players, new interest, and I think with VEDP's focus on kind of the economic development aspect for Virginia, the working group that's already kind of ahead of the game, there's a lot of opportunity for the Commonwealth there. Are there other updates that we have from any of the members they wanted to bring up this time? Okay. Or any other questions or comment for good of the order? Okay. So I think we'll go to public comment unless we have anything else.